Hey everybody, Elizabeth Nader back with you, the Nader Narrative and Jersey First TV. Choices in education, big topic. You know, education is important to Jersey First. It's one of the areas we focus on. But what is the story in New Jersey about choices? What choices do parents have? Do they have choices? This has been an area that parents have gotten involved in heavily since the start of the pandemic, running for Board of Education, speaking out loudly about what's going on in the schools. And now more and more parents are saying, what choices do we have? What freedom is there in education? We pay so much in taxes, yet we're not able to make these choices for our children. We have children in New Jersey trapped in schools that are underperforming, that can't move out of those schools. So we have this big issue in New Jersey that we really, really care about. We want to talk about that in the framework of what's happening on the federal level with an organization who is focusing on a way to encourage investment in school choice. And we'll bring someone on right now who can give us some insight into what's going on with this. Peter Murphy from the Invest in Education Coalition. Welcome to the show, Peter. You're a senior advisor with this group. I'm going to play their video in a second, but give us a high-level view of what this group is trying to do.
Elizabeth, thank you. Great to be on with you. The Invest in Education Coalition is an advocacy organization for school choice on a national level. And we work in partnership with groups across the country in every state, all designed to move out of Congress school choice legislation that will benefit children across every state in the union, especially places like New Jersey that really don't have a bona fide school choice program for private school opportunities.
Absolutely. Let's take a look quickly at a short video that you guys did. I think it's really great. We'll help explain it a little bit more.
What if every child in America had access to a great school? What if every parent had the opportunity to shape their child's future? At Invest in Education, our mission is to make that dream a reality for every family. But you can't do that if you don't have access to a quality education. No child should be forced to go to a failing or unsafe school because they can't afford to go somewhere else. And parents should have the right to move their child to a different school if their current school isn't working for them. Sadly, today that right is really only available if you're wealthy enough to move or send your child somewhere else. There is a better way. School choice empowers parents by allowing public and private funds to follow students to the schools or services that best fit their needs, whether public, private, charter, religious, homeschool, or any other learning environment families choose. That system already works for 600,000 children in school choice states across America. At Invest in Education, we're working to pass tax credit legislation that will make that dream a reality for every American family. If you support that mission, we hope you'll join us.
Okay, so Peter, school choice, 34 states have some form of it. New Jersey really doesn't have anything beyond the charter schools and a couple of programs that allow you to switch public schools. But you guys are approaching this from the federal level. So this all sounds great. What does it really mean in terms of the legislation that you are trying to pass?
So as the video indicated, there's a $10 billion scholarship tax credit bill introduced in Congress last summer by the late Jackie Walorski of Indiana, who died tragically in August, and Congressman Burgess Owens from Utah. In the House. In the Senate, it's Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana and Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, who has been a fabulous leader on this subject. And the upshot of this is it's going to use the federal tax code to drive private money into scholarship granting organizations for K-12 education. That's really what it is. It's so much of what policy, economic policy has been driven by the tax code, by incentives, by reducing taxes, by targeted tax changes designed to get the private economy and to grow. And in this case, it's not so much business or individuals, but it's contributors, getting contributors to put into these K-12 scholarship funds, which will exponentially expand the available private scholarship money for children from not just low income, but working and middle class families to access better, more suitable education opportunities. So it's, using the tax code really in a smart way that's going to drive private sector money is how we open up access and how we enable and really transcend so many places in this country, like New Jersey, that just won't allow that sort of thing. They won't allow choice. If you have enough money and you can live in a nice suburb with a nice school district, good for you. If you can't do that, and most people can't, then you're stuck.
Right.
And for a lot of people, don't have that freedom. And when you think about the choice we have in healthcare, what hospital we'll go to, what college we'll go to, nobody questions the right of Americans to have choice in a number of areas, even public housing vouchers. You can live, you have a variety there. But in K-12 education, again, unless you can afford to live in a certain suburb or quality district, you don't have much of any choice. And even if you are in a place and want to go somewhere better, or things change where you are, then you have to sell your house. You have to go through all kinds of machinations. It's just a system that really needs a good look at. And this is a way to inject something that we're really sorely lacking, in contrast to almost every other aspect of our lives.
Right. It's a good point. I mean, we do an incredible job as Americans being charitable, right? And a lot of that is driven by the tax code and the fact that there are tax deductible organizations. In fact, your organization, part of it is a C3 tax deductible organization, meaning people who contribute can take that right off. So we know that works, and that has driven that whole industry, if you will, and that Americans are big givers. But let's talk about how this would work, because this would encourage now people, again, to get a tax deduction to be able to give to these scholarships. Now, to me, this is a little more obvious in a state like Arizona, which has so much school choice, right? They have ESA accounts, and they have the money follows the child and all of that. But in New Jersey right now, we don't truly have flexibility. As you so eloquently said, if you don't have the money to live in the right district, then your only choice is to pay for private school. And then do you really have the money for that? So New Jersey's tough in that regard. So if this were to pass in DC, it would pass as a federal law. It would change the tax code. So how would that look in a state that doesn't really have freedom in education?
So a tax credit is the vehicle. And what a tax credit, and look, I have to remind myself the difference all the time. So a tax credit is what this would do on your federal, individual, and business taxes for companies. Right now, as you said, if you make a donation to a nonprofit entity, you get a tax deduction, which is the amount of your donation would come off of of the income that's taxable to you. So your tax burden would drop because you have lower taxable income in the amount of the contribution. That's pretty standard, straightforward, and it's a critical element of our societal makeup. It drives charity in all kinds of areas, churches and other C3 organizations, tax exempt organizations. What a tax credit would do is it would enhance that tax benefit. It would make it a much more robust benefit to the donor by lowering what you owe in taxes, not just what your taxable income is. It would lower the amount you owe to the federal government by the amount you give. Now, there's some limitations to that's proposed in this law, but you could make a $5,000 contribution to a scholarship granting organization and lower your federal income tax by $5,000. That's an incentive.
That's much more impactful than the typical tax deduction, because this is after all of those have been factored in, as you say. So you're literally lowering your tax burden, bottom line.
Right. Now, importantly, and this is important, keep in mind, when you make the donation and it comes off your income or comes off your tax liability, you're still out the money. I mean, it's not like you're getting. We call about we refer to these things as tax benefits, but in truth, you're not getting any benefit personally. You're helping someone else's children
Yeah.
get scholarships. You're just in effect, you're redirecting your funds from the government to a scholarship granting organization. And I make that point because a lot of people think, well, we're going to cut taxes for the wealthy, and no, actually, you're going to enable people of all income levels to shift what they owe in taxes. They're not getting the money back.
Right.
They're still out money one way or the other. They're not getting an electric car in return. They're not being able to get some sort of benefit to them. And I think that's an important point to make, because issues like this, using the tax code often gets demagogued and attacked by opponents of school choice as saying it's some sort of tax break. And it's not. It really isn't. It's simply using the private donor as the vehicle by which you bring educational access and opportunity to someone else's children.
So that's a pretty intelligent solution. Hard to argue against that. As you say, it doesn't benefit, except you feel good. It doesn't benefit the taxpayer, except they say, hey, I don't want Uncle Sam to have this $5,000. I want a child to have this $5,000 in the example that you gave. So this is addressing school choice, or encouraging it really from the federal level. But it's really specific in your bill that it doesn't go beyond this, right, Peter? I mean, you're not dictating to the states anything in this. You're simply allowing the tax code to provide for this choice for taxpayers.
That's exactly right, Elizabeth. You have, right now, education is and should be largely a state and local function. School districts, the state certainly has a role because it finances so much of public education. That is properly a state and local function. It's not the purview of the federal government, certainly not on the constitutional level. Now, over many decades, federal government has played a larger and larger role, and let's just stipulate it's been for good intentions. It just hasn't worked out that way. And you had presidents of both parties trying to intervene federally with education policy, throwing more money at the problem, dictating policy at the local level with carrots and sticks. And I think the consensus in Washington is that largely has been ineffective. No Child Left Behind was basically ended and never to be revisited. There were all kinds of mandates with good intentions, but in the end, it just did not demonstrably change things very much. And now you have a ton of federal spending, no accountability for it, especially after the COVID pandemic when schools closed anyway. I mean, even an attempt to have federal spending tied to school openings failed in Congress. Congress couldn't pass something like that due to teacher union opposition. All of that is bypassed here. This is simply using the private sector, individuals and corporations, to make these donations. There's no interference with state and local policy, no mandates, no nothing. It's really, now, what will happen, and this is a good thing, I would argue, is states and localities are going to have to respond to the free choices of families.
Right.
If families choose to move their child to, say, a private school or a faith-based school down the street, that could potentially change how the districts are run. If there's fewer children, you're going to have to make other changes. It could potentially change staffing levels and bus routes and how they allocate funds. So that's going to be affected, but that's because of parents' choices.
Right.
And that's who this should revolve around. This should revolve around parents and children, not bureaucrats and teachers. Public education exists for children. It does not exist for employment of adults. And I think that's a very important understanding people should remind themselves of.
Yes.
We have schools to educate children, not to employ adults.
Well, that's gotten, turned upside down. As I said in my opening, especially in New Jersey, parents are speaking loudly. They're getting involved. And I'm not sure that they know exactly where to ask what, but they're asking everywhere. What are you doing? Why are you doing this? Why has school been shut down? Our kids are behind. Why are you teaching this? What is my choice? What can I opt into, out of, whatever? So parents are demanding more. And naturally, school choice has got to be addressed. So in New Jersey, while we don't have, tax credits right now, we don't have a way for the money to follow the child and all of that other states do. If this were to pass, then in theory, what could happen, I presume, Peter, is that these scholarship organizations would form, and you would see them forming throughout the country. But let's say they're in New Jersey, and if a parent wanted to have a child qualify for that, to get enough money maybe to send them to a private school, then you start to see the impact, right, of more of those choices and children exiting the public school system as a result. That seems to me to be the only way right now that we could leverage this in New Jersey until our legislators finally look at this and say, we're willing to pass some, more aggressive, real school choice, real freedom in education.
Well, it's not theory. I mean, this has been tried in several states. There's about 22 states that have scholarship tax credit laws. And the states, as the old saying goes, are laboratories of democracy, right? So this legislation at the federal, in Congress right now, is based on those design features that have worked really well in a bunch of states. Now, outside of Florida, Arizona, maybe a couple of others, most of the state school choice programs are fairly circumscribed. They're limited in eligibility. They're limited in size and scope. So even states with existing programs, this will add to that in a positive impact. More children will be able to benefit. But in a place like New Jersey, what you're going to see is, as you pointed out, there'll be scholarship organizations that do exist now that will spring up, and donors will, there's a whole pool of money that donors will be able to transmit to those scholarship granting organizations. And Jersey children are going to have school choice, private school options for the first time. In addition, it's important to point out that in this law that's being proposed, a scholarship does not just have to be tuition, private school tuition. It could be other educational expenses similar to the 529 programs you have for higher ed. So you could have a child that says, you know what, my school's okay, but I want to take an AP course and pay for that. Or I need test prep or tutoring. I need a new computer. These are eligible expenses that a scholarship granting organization can fund through a scholarship, not private sector tuition, but supplemental education expenses for public school students. There's going to be a lot of that undoubtedly. So it's not just school choice, but it's really educational freedom, the freedom to make up voids in your own education in the public schools. You may not have a viable option near your house. So it's really that flexibility and parental empowerment that's so special about this effort.
Well, as you just said, similar to 529, it's more than tuition. And as you probably know, Rosemary Becky, our founder, was instrumental in designing the 529
Right.
and getting that passed. And so that's near and dear to our hearts. So we care about that. I think
we're building off her work.
Building off her work. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think this is an interesting way to back into it in New Jersey. And we want to encourage people to look into how they support this. You brought something up before we went live about, the federal versus the state issue, because, this comes down to the age-old argument, right, about what are states' rights versus the federal rights when it comes to designing these things. You made an analogy to civil rights. Make that analogy again for the interview. I thought it was interesting.
Sure. So the civil rights was such a monumental issue in this country for so much of its history, really. And of course, a war was fought over it, very, very bloody war. Well, 100 years later, there was, wide sections of our nation were still denied basic civil rights, voting rights, and what have you. And that really changed in the 1960s. But it was no easy task, and there were a lot of members of Congress opposed to it, particularly from southern states, and even some others, and because it was viewed as not the purview of the federal government to be, there was the states' rights versus Constitution and what the federal government could really do here. And eventually the argument won out that no, the federal government, there's a constitutional right to equality, and there's First Amendment and all the rest. And so we passed civil rights, in the mid 60s. Well, it's sort of cliche to say that the school choice issue is the civil rights issue of the 21st century, because under the guise of many state governments that are in the vice grip of the teacher union's political influence, you have thousands upon thousands of children that are denied basic workable education, and no amount of money is going to fix it, because we've been having this conversation for decades about more money, more money. Politicians have never been shy about spending more money on education, never. And yet the problems persist because there's no accountability in district public education. No one gets fired for doing a poor job, and the money spigots just keep going. And yet we're denying generation after generation a quality education, not just a basic minimal one, but a quality education. And now you've got a situation where not just in the inner cities and among poor families, but you've got school districts we're hearing and reading every day where the curriculum and the libraries and there's all kinds of objectionable content that's being imposed on children that parents have legitimate objections to. Right. And so the federal government has a role here to address the refusal and recalcitrant of states that won't tackle this problem, and where children continue to suffer. The federal government just can't sit by aloof of it all and tout, the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, which is why this bill is designed very meticulously to respect federalism, respect limited government at the federal level over education, and at the same time unleash the private sector to step in as a vehicle to bring opportunity and access to children that are being denied. Their civil rights are being denied because they don't have that education that will change their lives in a whole different and better trajectory going forward. So that's really what this is about.
That's such a great way to context this argument, I think, and this bill. And really, it shouldn't be a partisan issue. This is about our children, right? I mean, that's always amazed me. And you said so many good things in there. Throwing money at it just hasn't been the solution. As the Department of Education grows in DC, our kids are losing more and more for whatever reason. It just hasn't worked. And I think you described Jersey to a T, by the way, with the teachers union and all of that. So this is a breath of fresh air. We want as many people in Jersey as possible to know about this bill, to vocalize their support. So Peter, as we start to wrap up, I want you to tell us about where the bill stands, give us the bill numbers, and really how people can best vocalize the fact that they want this to pass.
Well, the bill is entitled the Educational Choice for Children Act, ECCA, Educational Choice for Children Act. It's the number right now in the House of Representatives. So the bill exists in the House and the Senate, so they're different bill numbers. The House bill is HR 8137, and the Senate bill is 4416. So S 4416, HR 8137. And this is on our website at investined.org. So really, the democracy still exists. Voters matter the most to politicians. I mean, lots of things are important to politicians, but the two most important things to every elected official are jobs and housing. Their job and their housing. And that depends on voters to keep their job and their housing. It's kind of a silly illustration, but voters matter the most to everyone. And so people like Chris Smith and Jeff Van Drew, very important players in this. Two Congress members from New Jersey. Josh Gottheimer, is that his?
Gottheimer, yes.
That's another example. They should be contacted. They should be backing this. Look, I was in New York for many years, Elizabeth, and very similar state to New Jersey, very powerful teacher union state. And they got very heavily involved in politics. But for a while, the teachers unions weren't paying a lot of attention, believe it or not. And a scholarship tax credit advanced very far in the process in a bipartisan manner. Democrats are natural supporters of this sort of thing, but they have this ungodly, unholy alliance with the teacher unions. And a lot of good Democratic elected officials have just simply backed away. And it's really tragic. Voters need to exercise their democracy, their democratic rights and contact these people.
Well, now is the time.
Yeah.
November 8th is around the corner. So
Co-sponsor that bill. Ask
Yeah.
them, call
Ask
them.
them.
Don't email them. Emails
Right.
get lost.
Right.
Call their office, their district office, and you can Google their names, and if their district office comes right up, that's a quick way to do it. And demand that they do this, that they co-sponsor a bill like this. And the other, just last quick point, if I could, if you know, one natural question comes up, well, look, only so many kids can get help, and this is just a small part of the population in K-12 ed. I mean, what about the larger system? How do we fix that? Well, this is a big step toward addressing the larger systemic problems in public ed, and here's why. Right now, schools can close with impunity, okay? The school boards, teacher unions, education bureaucracy, they dictate.
That's right.
The dynamic that's going to change here is every parent, with the passage of this bill, even though it may only help, say, 2 million kids across the country, every parent potentially becomes a customer who can take their child out, okay? Not just wealthy parents.
Right.
Every parent becomes a consumer. And the district will be sensitive to that reality. They can leave if they don't like what's going on here. They actually can leave. That dynamic does not exist in many places in this country right now. It will happen nationwide. So that sounds theoretical and hypothetical, but in fact, the teacher unions agree with that.
Yeah, they do.
They're opposing this.
That's why they're opposing
really
it.
Afraid.
Yes.
And a lot of parents will have leverage.
Yes.
With their school district to bring changes at a systemic wide level.
Yeah.
That's another important dynamic about a bill like this.
It's bringing the intelligence of really free markets to one of the most important things that you purchase. And listen, when I say purchase, some of you are writing checks for it. Some of you are just writing your tax check. You're still purchasing it.
Sure.
You're still paying for your child's education. So
they can tell you to pound sand in the district level. And
yeah,
as we learned during the COVID period, people were powerless to do much about it unless you had money. Well, now everybody potentially can do something about it, put their child in another school, and the state aid and dollars that flow with that child go with them in many cases. And that's a fearful thing for the education establishment. They have to be more responsive as a result.
It's brilliant legislation. It's simple, but it has a resounding impact because it brings in so many other things with it. So we need to get behind it. And certainly to the audience, call your congressperson today and find out if they support it. Ask them to support it. If you're confused about who to vote for, let that guide you along. And then after November 8th, continue to put the pressure on, because this New Jersey is how we bring freedom into education. And we may have to do it this way. It's a brilliant way. Peter, it's such a great bill and it's so simple. I know the organization needs support as well. So give people the website again and they can go and look at the bill. The bill is linked there, the actual context of the bill. You can read it. They can also donate there to support your efforts. Can you give that website again?
Thank you, Elizabeth. It's investineducation.org. Investineducation, one word, .org. Again, the bill is the Educational Choice for Children Act, 8137. Call every member of Congress knows this bill because we've been talking to them in DC here, but they need to hear from back home. Most important thing.
That's great. That's great, Peter. Well, we are here to help. And as we see what happens with the midterms and, God willing, we get more and more like-minded people who want to step on the gas with this. We pray that it's bipartisan. And we in Jersey would like to help you get that over the finish line because it could be life-changing for so many students in New Jersey. So thank you very much on behalf of the parents here. And we will keep in touch and see where we're at with this bill. Let us know as things change, Peter.
Thank you for everything you're doing, and wonderful to be on today. Thank you for the opportunity, and best to you and Rosemary, and let's keep up the fight.
Sounds great. And to my audience, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. Please do reach out and put the pressure on. You know how it works, and we will see you all next week.